Hello, I'm Paul Orselli, and despite all our travails, I am super happy to be joined today by Christian Greer. Hi, Christian, how are you?
Hey, Paul, how's it going? We finally got this worked out.
I was gonna say we got it worked out. Well, good to see you. And so, Christian, what's just one thing about exhibits you'd like to share with people?
Well, when you told me about this prompt, I was thinking, oh, this will be easy. I just have to come up with one thing. But boy, is it hard to figure out that one thing. So I'm going to start off and just tell you what it is, but then I'm going to kind of backtrack and work my way into it. And hopefully this will make sense as we're talking. I want to say, one, I really like your interviews and your style of doing this. Is valuable to our community. We get to share ideas from other minds. And frankly, I just enjoy watching the other people ask the same questions. So I think when we're all done, we'll have a nice collection of sort of ideas and nuggets that you can use to go forward. But the one that I'm going to leave you with is the definition of done. And the reason why I bring this up is it's sort of an agile project management term. But I think we all get the idea, whether we've used Agile or not, or Scrum or not, or Waterfall, or whatever you've been using as your sort of methodology and tools. But I was in a course once when I was getting certified in Agile project management, and we were talking about two very important things in projects, especially when it comes to developing exhibits. Now, I'm going to talk about it from two sides. One would be the exhibit development side, and the other is the experiential side that our visitors and guests and learners do, because those things have to be in balance, right? But it really has to do with this idea of incremental approaches to things and iteration. And those are sort of two different components. The incremental part of it means that step by step, you're trying pieces of things, bite-sized pieces that you want to get out to people that get completed or done. But there's also the iterative part that every time you do something as rapidly as you do it, especially if you're trying to fail early and often, the more you learn from your mistakes, or you find other opportunities, or you manage both positive and negative risk as you explore something. And so I was in this course for certification, and the teacher of the instructor that I had was Mike Beadle. And if you've ever been to the website for the Agile Manifesto, you'll see that he's one of the original signatories of the Agile Manifesto and helped to create the Agile processes that we use today. And as my instructor, we were talking about all these ways in which we were coming up with ideas and being incremental and being iterative and trying things and failing fast, early and often, delivery, user stories, and everything from design thinking and empathy-based approaches to looking at efficiency and effectiveness through Six Sigma and Lean. And when it was all said and done, I was like, this is great and all, but how do you know when you're actually done, when you complete something, right? Like, because I don't know about you.
Good question.
But the experience I've had in developing exhibits, they never feel like they're done. Even when you feel like the conceptual part is done, we figured out the scope, something else comes up, it shifts you in another direction. And this is why, and I've been involved in a lot of these and really trying to unstick projects, is trying to figure out how to get off that hamster wheel of ideas and actually produce something for that audience that makes sense while you're still within the time frame, while you're still within the budget constraints that you're dealing with. And he said, Christian, that's the thing about Agile that we discovered. He said, we discovered this. We took an empirical approach to finding solutions. And that meant we knew that we didn't have all the answers. And what we were trying to do was merely discover what the right way was. And sometimes you'll see these design thinking and even Scrum projects and things starting with this idea of how might we? You ask these how might we questions. How might we begin something? How might we? Because you don't know you're going to get there. And that's why you want to try to take these small chunks. But he said, there's a difference between the acceptance criteria that you make for a certain thing that you want to present and produce. Let's say it's a specific exhibit element in your exhibition, or it might be an interactive, or it might have to do with some of the, even the education components of what interpreters and educators are doing, presenting within your exhibit. But his point was, you need to make sure that everyone is on the same page when you're doing these sprints. In other words, sort of intense development, time-bound activities where people produce things and they get shipped out and released like that. He said, you need to know when it's done. And that means not just done right now, but done for us to get it out there. And that's where they created this definition of done. Taking those items on your product backlog or the wish list, that's sort of the idea, those user stories as they get described, and turning them into something cohesive, something of value that matches sort of the need of the perspective of your guest or your visitor or your learner or participant, with sort of what can actually be provided. So I'll give you an example of where this came up. When I was at St. Louis Science Center, we were developing an exhibit called Grow. And when we were putting this exhibit in place, it had gone through so many iterations that the project was kind of in project hell, meaning, didn't we already cover this, or haven't we made a decision? And it just felt like, Paul, something was missing. And what was missing is we really didn't know what was specifically going to be released to the public to match up with sort of the personas, the identities, and the user stories that we wanted to present to them in this incredible exhibition. And that required us redoing our interpretive plan and focusing on what we thought the greatest outputs were, and really prioritizing what at minimum, that minimal viable product that we needed to make a difference was going to be. So I think it's the definition of done.
Well, you know, it's interesting, and it just two things. One, I'll just give a little pause for the cause and say that since this will be on YouTube, we will of course include links and references.
Oh, sure.
Because I think you just rattled off a lot of things that people are like, wait, what? How can I find out more about that? And that, so that's great. But I think this notion of done, it's really interesting how time plays into these projects, because if you compress time, there is, of course, a sense of urgency. And it's like, okay, we need to be done by this date. And so you figure out how to put things out, because it's like, we need to open by this date. But there's also the flip side of projects, which I found, if you had, and maybe that was part of the issue in St. Louis that you mentioned, if you have these sort of lag times or lull times where the project sort of stalls for funding reasons or construction reasons or who knows what, then people seem to sort of lose the thread. You know, it's like, okay, where are we at with this again? And then you sort of have to do that. And so I don't know how that triangulates with the notion of done, but time seems like an important element when you're thinking about done.
You know, it's probably the most important element. You know, I think PMI's definition for a project is a temporary endeavor. It starts with that idea that it's temporary to create a unique product, service, or result. So the unique part is, let's do something that is never been done before or not done in this way. Anything else is just a process if it's not unique. But that's what makes it a project. And that product, service, or result that you're creating, in that case, you add those up. In our world, that just means experience. You know, you want a high quality experience where people are interacting, engaging, using their prior knowledge, building upon the ideas of others, experiencing something in the same room with people, whether it's live animals or collection or you know, levers that you're pulling in an exhibit to learn about some mechanical principle. All those things are really important. But on the back end of that, in order to get to that point, how do you manage time? And everybody's time is valuable. I think one of the advantages of Agile project management, and I've used both systems and are comfortable with both. I'm speaking of Agile and Waterfall, the traditional project management, but you know, they both use time differently. In traditional project management, you're looking at time across phases, like from start to finish on a project. In Agile, you're almost flipping that on its head, because you're doing smaller versions of that in order to produce pieces of things. So it's not like at the end, you pull the curtain back and say, ta-da, here's the new exhibit. You'd be putting things out on the floor. You'd be sort of prototyping more and doing maybe formative rather than summative evaluations and assessments. And so the key thing there is time boxing. When you put people in a box, right? And people say, well, you have to think out of the box. We need to teach people how to think inside of the box. Because sometimes that's all we have is the box, and to get out of the box means we're getting unstable. Not everything needs to be unstable, especially with big projects, but on smaller scales, you can put things into the box. Like the quantum of exhibition development is time boxing. And that is giving people 2 weeks or a period of time to develop one specific component, trying it out and doing that, where you have more control. And after a while, let's say you did that just over, a 4-week period, or let's say 6-week period, you could have 12, 6 different things that could be built within that process. And that gives you a better understanding. And if I may say this, Paul, what I think is very important about exhibits is, especially for those that are leading and managing these projects, not everybody gets it. They just don't get until they see it. Some people don't know what an exhibit is going to be. I've been on things where people had a vision all along from start to finish what the exhibit was going to be. They had that thinking process. They knew what it was. And then other people didn't even know what the exhibit had been on the project for years and didn't really even have a clue of what it was going to be until it was unveiled. Well, when you have two different kinds,
that's a little scary.
When you have these extremes, right? I mean, this is why the arguments happen, behind the scenes. Well, I thought we were doing this. Well, what are we, and you're trying to put these pieces in place. So I think time and managing is important. And the smaller you can make these increments, I think you create that sense of urgency, as you mentioned, but you also give people a chance not to screw it up for too long.
Yeah, well, no, well, it's interesting what you just mentioned several times, which is again related to time and management and iteration, is breaking things into these manageable chunks. Yes. And maybe commonly understood chunks. If someone has this vision of the entire arc and sweep of the project, it's easy to see that someone else who might be involved in different aspects of the project might not be able to sort of get the whole scope, like, yeah. I don't see the Grand Canyon here. I see the place where I'm standing, and
right.
You need sort of both of those points of view. So that idea of breaking things into chunks is I think a really interesting way to think about that, because it certainly relates to time and iteration and that, because you don't iterate an entire project. You iterate pieces of the project and
pieces of it,
other pieces of the project, and then see how
and sometimes your iteration on the configuration management of how things are coming together. And this is an interesting thing. An exhibit that I did in St. Louis on games is called Game XP, or Game Exploration. This was an exhibit that was really designed for one thing, and that was, how like you bring your family to a science center and there's a point at which the kids outgrow the science center, or they outgrow the zoo, or they outgrow the children's museum. You want to keep those people around. Well, the one thing I thought we couldn't fail to be able to do that was to do an exhibit on games. And our target audience was more that late elementary, middle school type of audience. And the goal was to try to use games, and rather than to sort of gamify science, our approach was to science-ify games. Now, what I mean by that is to kind of move from, you're flipping the perspective. One thing that Einstein was really good at is he was good. It's funny that, he's known for his relativity. That wasn't what he got the Nobel Prize for, but he was known for relativity. And to some extent, it makes sense, because his mind was really about reference frames. And those paradigm shifts need to happen in our organizations and our projects as well. We need to take kind of how we thought things before. Again, we're taking traditional project management and turning it like this, and then doing it down the road is how we get to that iteration and incrementalization of Agile. But it's the same thing for our projects. We wanted to, instead of gamify things in the organization. We wanted to scienceify something they already wanted to do. In other words, taking an empathetic, human-centered approach to design, we know kids like to engage through games. So why don't we just start there? And then think about, how do their games teach us more about science, technology, engineering, and math? Then it allowed us to have something that we knew, regardless of what we presented, in any iteration would be a hit. And that's exactly what we had.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Christian, this might be the time in the video where we're done, but I am going to just say again that we're going to put links, because there's a lot of information packed into what we just talked about. So we're going to put some links and references so that people can unpack the chunks that we've set aside. And I'd like to really thank you for taking the time. You always make me think about things in interesting ways, Christian. So
Likewise.
And-
Well, maybe next time when we come back, I'll tell you a little bit about the things we're doing now at the Michigan Science Center.
Well, I'm just gonna give a shout out to your background, because I'm born and raised in Detroit, so I'm always happy to see
That's right.
the location of one of my early museum jobs there in the background and in my hometown of Detroit. And I know that you and your team, I just saw on LinkedIn actually that you added someone new to your team, and so
Yeah,
I know you're doing great things, and that's always a place that has a place in my heart. So it does my heart good to see you and your team doing great stuff there at the Michigan Science Center.
Well, thank you. Well, I think this is an important thing, just to have people like you in our field that are really pushing the boundaries, keeping us thinking about getting better, because at a time like this and this new normal, we need new ideas. We need new approaches. Like, you're not going to be able to survive if you're not watching videos like this, if you're not trying to meet with people that are on the cutting edge and finding a way to kind of balance the risk and reward. We have to keep pushing forward. It's dangerous to do so. You've got a whole new team because there's been a lot of turnover, or maybe you're trying to fill positions, but that's not a reason or an excuse to not continue to push this field forward. And I'm excited to be on this, on your YouTube channel, and also to be looking forward to our Aztec coming up in September in person in Pittsburgh. So
that's
going to
great.
be a lot of fun.
I thank you for being here today, electronically, digitally, and I look forward to the next time our paths cross in person. So thanks again,
Absolutely.
Christian.
Take care, Paul.